Chapter 3. The Book of Storms. After Jukes finished writing his comments in the logbook, the captain arrived in the chart room, and it was Jukes's turn to go below deck. Out on the bridge, he met the second mate, a strange man with bad teeth, a long nose, and a red, angry-looking face. He never spoke much to the rest of the crew. This was his first trip on the Nan Shan.
It's a good thing for those Chinese labourers that this ship doesn't roll so easily in a storm,
said Jukes, laughing brightly.
Don't you think?
Just you wait,
said the second mate.
Do you mean to say that it's going to get worse?
Asked Jukes.
You said it, not me,
said the second mate, with a cold smile. The ship was rolling more wildly now than before, and in the end, Jukes decided that he must go back and speak to Captain MacWhirr. It was a stupid idea to sail the ship into a typhoon. They should try and do something about it. Back once more in the chart room, he found MacWhirr reading a book there.
What's the matter?
Asked MacWhirr.
The swell's getting worse, sir,
replied Jukes.
Yes, I can see that.
Said MacWhirr.
Anything else?
Jukes was not sure how to begin. Then he had an idea.
I was thinking of the passengers, sir.
What passengers, Jukes?
The Chinese labourers, sir?
Well, why don't you say what you mean? I've never heard anyone talk of Chinese labourers as paying passengers before. Ha! That's a good one.
He laughed.
And what about them?
He went on.
Well, with all this rolling, a lot of water is coming into the ship's hold. That's where all the Chinese are, sir. I thought that maybe we could go east. Then the swell would come at us straight on and not make us roll from side to side.
So, you want me to move a powerful steamship 50 degrees off course to make some Chinese labourers more comfortable? I've heard some stupid things in my life, but this... And what do you want us to do after that? Go 50 degrees the other way again to finish up back on course?
I know that you don't think much of my idea, sir. But at the moment, we're busy sailing into a typhoon,
said Jukes, looking MacWhirr in the eye.
And it seems you think that we should try and sail away from it.
Jukes said nothing. This was a different Captain MacWhirr from the one he knew. MacWhirr held up the book in his hand.
I was just reading the chapter on storms in this book. I think you'd like it. If we do what it says in this book, We have to sail all over the sea trying to avoid storms. Can you believe that? Think of us sailing an extra 300 miles on our way to Fu Chao just because of bad weather. What about the extra coal? The extra time? Think of us coming into Fu Chao 2 days late. What will they say to me? Where have you been, Captain? Oh, it took us longer. We had to avoid some bad weather, I'll say. Then they'll ask, was it a very bad storm? I don't know, I'll have to answer. I didn't see it.
The captain looked at Jukes. Did the first mate understand what he was saying? MacWhirr tried to explain more.
That kind of thinking is all wrong, Jukes. A storm is a storm, and a steamship has just got to go through the storms that stand in front of her as well as she can. There are some things that books can't tell you.
MacWhirr stopped talking and sat down on the window seat. He pulled off his boots and put his legs up. He suddenly felt tired.
Jukes, tell them to call me if there's any change in the weather.
Yes, sir.
Answered the first mate, and with that, he walked out on deck again, closing the chart room door behind him. Captain MacWhirr closed his eyes. He was tired after all that speaking. Those 20 minutes of conversation with Jukes were all that he believed about the sea and sailing. Now his head felt empty, and he could think of nothing. He opened his eyes some time later. What was that loud noise? Was it the wind? Why did no one call him? Just then, he saw Jukes's face at the open chart room door. The first mate was shouting something, but the captain couldn't hear him very well because of the wind.
Started! This suddenly! 5 minutes ago!
Cried Jukes. MacWhirr tried to put on his boots. This was not easy, because the ship was now moving from side to side very wildly. At last, they were on. Through the wind, Jukes heard the captain saying,
I told you! Any change? Call me!
Jukes tried to explain.
Wind! Sudden! Northeast! Thought you... Sure! Here!
Again, the wind carried away half his words before the captain's ears could catch them.
We must try to stay on course for as long as we can,
said MacWhirr. Suddenly, the Nan Shan went up over an enormous wave and ran deep down into the sea on the other side of it. Water flew over her sides. Jukes and MacWhirr couldn't see anything for some minutes. When they could see again, Jukes pulled at MacWhirr's arm and pointed up over their heads. just then, all the stars went suddenly from before their eyes, and all that they could see was a heavy, coal dark sky above them. Chapter 4. The Typhoon Hits. Jukes knew that at a time like this, a ship's officer must not show his feelings. He started to tell his men to fasten anything on the ship that was moving. He wanted them to see in him a man who was not afraid of some bad weather, a man who knew that this typhoon was coming from the beginning. But with every minute, Jukes understood that this typhoon was much bigger and wilder than any other usual storm. Great waves fell noisily onto the deck, covering the Nan Shan in water from top to bottom. She was still rolling heavily from side to side, but now she began to move up and down wildly in the sea too, like an enormous animal worried sick with fear.
I'm not sure that we're going to live through this,
thought Jukes. He felt happy that Captain MacWhirr was there, for it was the captain who had to decide what to do in difficult times. And saving the crew's lives was the captain's job, not his. MacWhirr did not feel so comfortable. He knew that he and his crew could all die in this typhoon, and he knew that he must decide what to do very carefully. It was now a question of life or death. He looked in front of him, trying to understand how the typhoon worked, like a man looking deeply into the eyes of a dangerous enemy. But all was dark around him. He could see nothing, not even the ship under his feet. He felt like a man who has lost the power to see and who doesn't know where he is. Standing next to him, Duke said,
I think that we've sailed into the worst part of the typhoon.
But this was not true. The worst part came a few minutes later, and it came suddenly. The typhoon exploded around them with dangerous power. It seemed that the wind and the waves wanted to break the ship into hundreds of pieces. Many sailors tried to grab some part of the ship, but couldn't do it in time. The waves sent them flying down the deck. Jukes was thrown onto his back. It seemed to him that all of the China Sea was trying to drown him. It threw him wildly from side to side, and he heard himself shouting again and again,
My God! My God! My God!
Hurrying to find something to hold on to, his hands touched a boot, then two boots. He held on, and then he felt Captain MacWhirr's strong arms around him, pulling him up. They stood for a short while, holding on to each other. But then the water knocked them onto the deck. At last, they found each other again, and this time they held on to the ship's railings. The typhoon was now pulling the lifeboats off the ship. One by one, they went into the angry waters of the China Sea.
Our lifeboats have gone, sir!
shouted Jukes. Because of the noise of the wind, he couldn't hear MacWhirr's answer very well.
Can't help! Had to happen! Some things left behind!
The captain's words surprised Jukes. Was that all that MacWhirr had to say? Again, he found the captain's way of thinking strange. The first mate looked at the waves loudly hitting the deck and tried to decide if the Nan Shan would survive the typhoon. If the engines kept going, if the waves didn't break the deck, if not too much water went into the hold. But then he thought, more or less without fear.
No, she won't survive.
At the same time that he was thinking this, he felt Captain MacWhirr's heavy arm over his shoulder. He replied by putting his own arm round MacWhirr.
Will she live through this?
He asked the captain. At first, there was no answer. Only the angry noise of the wind and the sea against the ship's side. But then he heard MacWhirr's voice.
Going to? All right! Good ship! Everything will! For the best!
Jukes wasn't sure if this was more of the captain's slow but sure way of thinking, or if the ship really would be all right. But it was good to hear MacWhirr's words.
Where are crew?
Asked MacWhirr.
What? Say, sir!
Jukes couldn't hear his question.
Where? All the men!
Said MacWhirr. Just then, Jukes felt a hand touching his boot, then a second hand, and then he felt both these hands pulling on his trousers. A man was on his knees trying to stand up. He was using Jukes's body to help him. It was the bosun. He was a little man with short legs and long arms, who usually smiled a lot.
Is that you, sir?
He said to MacWhirr.
Yes, bosun. What have you come to tell us?
Replied MacWhirr.
It's about the Chinese labourers, sir!
Well, what about them, bosun?
Said Jukes.
The sea has taken them all, sir!